how did the LAPD, which in the 20s, 30s, and 40s was this spectacularly corrupt police department, suddenly emerge as the dragnet police department in the 1950s? What changed so suddenly? Did things really change so suddenly? What was happening? And I became convinced that the answer to that was bound up in the life of Bill Parker, who was chief of police from 1950 to 1966, but whose influence stretches far beyond that. In 1934 and 1937, as a young aide and top aide to then police chief James Davis, Parker, who was also an attorney, crafted the city charter amendment, which laid the groundwork for the kind of autonomous and, in time, unaccountable police force that later emerged. Daryl Gates started off his career in the LAPD as Chief Parker's driver. He was a close protege. And it wasn't until 1993, after the Rodney King riots, that Warren Christopher, who had also been the vice chairman of the McComb Commission after the Watts riots, and the author of the controversial McComb Commission report, undid the charter amendments that Parker wrote as a young lieutenant in 1937. So sort of from a historical perspective, 1937 to 1993, an incredibly eventful period in Los Angeles history, was really the product, in a small extent, of one person. Mickey Cohen kind of came into the story accidentally at first. I realized early on that in order to sort of understand Parker, you had to understand the way the city worked in the Los Angeles underworld. Cohen was a colorful character, and what really whetted my interest was the fact I learned that in the 1950s he had written and then abandoned a book with the famous Chicago newspaperman turned playwright turned screenwriter Ben Hecht. His IMDb page is truly astonishing. And so I wondered what had happened to the manuscript and managed to track it down to the Newberry Library in Chicago. And as soon as I saw it, it just, it was clear that it was going to be a dual story. It was so evocative, and it was really a great stroke of good fortune to have the Hecht estate let me use it. So those are the two characters. I'm going to start by reading a little bit about the Los Angeles that Bill Parker found when he moved here in 1922. He was 17. He had grown up in Deadwood, South Dakota. His grandfather was the DA who cleaned up the Deadwood of Al Swearingen days. His grandfather was very prominent. He was the district attorney. He was elected to the state legislature before there was a state legislature. He was a congressman when South Dakota moved from being a territory to a state. And he died unexpectedly on a trip back from Washington, probably of cirrhosis of the liver, a problem which would have flowed to Parker as well. Bill Parker's father was a superintendent at the Homestead Mining Company, one of the pillars of the Hearst fortune. He was also a taciturn and somewhat violent person, which resulted in something very unusual for the era. Parker's mother was a very religious woman. Nonetheless, she separated from his father and moved to Los Angeles in 1922. After some uncertainty, Bill followed. They settled in Westlake, and young Bill got a job as a movie usher, first at the California Theater and then at Lowe's State. And here's the Los Angeles they found. Los Angeles was Deadwood writ large, a boomtown on a scale never seen before or since in this country. The city was growing so quickly that residents and visitors couldn't even agree on how to pronounce its name. To some, it was Los Angeles. To others, Los Angeles, or even Los Angeles, a pronunciation the Los Angeles Times suspected was a deliberate Eastern slur. The paper of record insisted that the proper pronunciation was distinctly Spanish, Los Angeles, a pronunciation it actually printed under its masthead for several years. Not until the 1930s did today's Los Angeles gain the clear upper hand. Whatever its pronunciation, it was clear that people couldn't wait to get there. Model Ts crammed the old Santa Fe Trail, today's Route 66, full of Midwesterners who were California bound. By 1922, the city's population had risen to more than 600,000 people. In 1876, it had 5,000 people. 15-story skyscrapers, heights were capped up to the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, lined Spring Street, the so-called Wall Street of the West. Dazzling electric signs proclaimed its next goal, 2 million population by 1930. At the corner of Wilshire and La Brea, newcomers were transfixed by something many had never seen before, neon. Everywhere there were automobiles. On a typical workday, some 260,000 cars jammed downtown Los Angeles, making the intersection of Adams and Figueroa the busiest in the world. Together, the intra-urban yellow and inter-urban red lines provided service over more than 1,000 miles of rail and transported an average 520,000 people into the downtown area every day. Total number of passenger trips in 1924, 110 million. All of the talk was boom, dollars, greatest in the world, sure to double in price, marveled the author Hamlin Garland, who visited LA in 1923. I've never seen so many buildings going up all at once. There are thousands in process in every direction I looked. The mingling of architectural styles was, to use a word coined in that same period, surreal. The city's neighborhoods, reported Garland, consist of hundreds of the gay little stucco bungalows in the Spanish, Mexican, Italian, Swiss, and many other styles, a conglomeration that cannot be equaled anywhere else on earth, I'm quite sure. If others noticed, they didn't seem to mind. The whole Middle West, Garland concluded, wants to come here. And no wonder. The city, to say nothing of its underworld, was a carnival. In downtown Los Angeles, the theaters and movie palaces that lined Broadway attracted thronging crowds to motley performances that mixed vaudevillians, singers, dancers, chorus girls, acrobats, even elephants, with silent films by stars like Buster Keaton, Fatty Arbuckle, Douglas Fairbanks, and Mary Pickford. Then as now, starstruck tourists could sign up for star tours that took them past the homes of their favorite celebrities. Streetcars packed with bands and draped with advertisements crisscrossed the city, announcing new towns every month. If every conceivable trick in advertising was not resorted to, it was probably due to an oversight, wrote one early philanthropist. High in the Hollywood Hills, a giant sign, each letter 50 feet tall and covered with 4,000 light bulbs, promoted one of Harry Chandler's new developments, Hollywood Land. Then there was the oil. Beginning in 1920, a series of spectacular discoveries just south of the city suddenly made Los Angeles into one of the world's great oil production centers. Ordinary Angelinas became obsessive investors in local oil syndicates, such as the ones organized by oilman C.C. Julian from his office suite above the palatial Lowe's State Theater on Broadway. It wasn't Sacramento in 1848. It wasn't Deadwood in 1876 or the Klondike in 1897. It was bigger. For a child of Deadwood, it should have been familiar terrain. Instead, Los Angeles would prove to be a cruel instructor. Parker, as I mentioned, got a job as a movie usher. And in that job, he was exposed to something novel and very dangerous, the femme fatale. The first was Theodosia Goodman, a tailor's daughter from Ohio, who, in the hands of her press agents, became Theda Bara, foreign, voluptuous, and fatal. A woman